أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من العين القوي الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين أما بعد السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. Yes, this is home. I know most of you. We have so many brothers and sisters visiting from abroad, and it's nice to welcome you all here to our home at JCC and in Toronto. What I'm going to present is not, I chose not to make this kind of a laborious kind of academic conference paper, but to make it a little bit more pastoral, just because in seeing the brothers and sisters that are here, I chose to do that. And the topic that I've chosen today is based on, as Alexander mentioned, I was the religious director at Sadiq for many years. For about 5 years or 4 years as director. I worked there for another 4, so about 9.5 years I worked directly with the students of Sadiq. And I've been with the community for 22 years now. And I've had time to reflect over those experiences, right? In being at the helm of the largest, probably one of the largest Shia Islamic schools in North America with 800 students and over 1,000 parents that I interacted with on a daily basis over a period of a decade. And to that effect, I'll quote a hadith of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, where he says, يَا ابْنِ مَسْعُودٍ يأتي على الناس زمان الصابر فيه على دينه مثل القابض على الجمر بكفه. That, O Ibn Mas'ud, a time of forbearance will come upon the people in which one's religion will be akin to a man holding a red-hot coal in the palm of his hand. That religion will be something difficult to hold on to. And this is what got me thinking that there's a bifurcation going on very often between ideals as to what a pious Muslim looks like, or what correct practice or orthodoxy looks like. And this tends to be the concern of the theologian or the jurist. And this is often described as what is, as an Islam which is lived according to a traditional textual understanding. And these are all the things that the ideal pious Muslim aspires to live by, shall we say. And realities can be thought of what people actually believe. What do they actually practice? And this tends to be the concern of the ethnographer or the anthropologist of religion. And I found myself over these years, over this period of 10 years, stuck in this kind of juxtaposition between ideals and realities. And we start asking these questions. To be a good Muslim and to live a normal life, what do these categories mean? And when faced with an opposition, it almost becomes a battle between competing cultural rubrics. So there's a tussle taking place between competing cultural rubrics. One is a commitment to autonomy, to this kind of absolute sense of autonomy, and the other one is a commitment to a scripture-based organized religion. These are cases when we hear, for example, I remember when I was at the school, I used to hear, well, boys and girls can't play sports together because Sheikh said it's not allowed. It had nothing to do with God. It had to do with because the person wearing that outfit said you can't do it. And I always remember we would have these conversations in staff meetings. If there's any of my fellow Sadiq staff here, you remember, and I always remember, it's not because Sheikh said you can't do it. The man that's dressed in this costume told you you can't play sports together. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with a deeper commitment to God. But it was almost seen as if the man dressed like me is restricting their autonomy. And there's a deeper reason for this, right? And it brings us to something that Robert George describes in his book, The Clash of Orthodoxy, where liberalism rejects an authority that lies outside of the individual or what the collective self deems reasonable. So what are these competing rubrics? They are the orthodoxy, inclusive of all of its allowances, as represented by Marja'iyya in the 12-verse Shi'i context, and on the other side, New Age liberalism. It is so ubiquitous that it is not even named. What makes this so interesting is that New Age liberalism, which I will define shortly, is so ingrained within the social consciousness of youth and a portion of parents that it needs to be unpacked and identified in its parts. Liberalism is what religious tradition was in Western Atlantic states, perhaps prior to the Second World War, in the sense that Christianity informed so many aspects of Western social existence that it was not something which needed to be found or defined. We cannot understand the experience of youth unless we understand the social and political philosophies that shape their worldviews and self-perception, even if they themselves don't understand what these are. This is something that Sheikh Mutahari pointed to. I remember reading an Arabic translation of some of his lectures called Al-Imdad al-Ghaybi fi Hayat al-Bashariyya. This was, of course, written years and years and decades ago, where he talks about this crisis within human beings. And he talks about the foundational departure from which people build their worldviews. And I've always been very interested in this, right? So when I would sit with a youngster who would come to see me, and they would say, you know, I'm having this problem, I have this girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever the situation is, and I just find this is too limiting, this is too limiting, this is too limiting. I would want to understand their foundational point of departure. Where are they coming from? Where is the root of their problem? Rather than opening up a risala amaliya and reading to them, parroting to them a fatwa of why something is wrong, I want to understand the point of departure. What philosophies have informed their life? Then I would go a step further and I would meet their parents. And I would ask their parents the same question. And the parents would look at me blank-faced. Because as I said, liberalism is so ubiquitous that Muslims have consumed it entirely that they don't even understand what it is. And this New Age liberalism, liberal secularism, or postmodernism forms the bedrock of nearly every outlet of human interaction. Hospitals, schools, entertainment, politics, and so on. It is no longer the proverbial elephant in the room, but it is a de facto position that most non-Muslims and many Muslims have adopted to or adapted to and simply live without even realizing it. Liberalism is a commitment to liberty, from Latin, liber or liber, free. Firstly, there's a categorical rejection of all sources of authority outside of the individual or what is known as a collective self as a basis of morality and social political organization. In this regard, I have to say, be very upfront. I've been very much inspired by two figures in my life. One is a man that I met 5 or 6 years ago. His name is Dr. Abdul Hakim Jackson. He's a brother from California, and I had the honor to meet him when he was a visiting professor at McMaster University. I'll share this story, a little short story with you. Dr. Jackson was visiting here, Abdul Hakim Jackson, an incredible scholar for those who know who he is in the Muslim community. He was a visiting professor at McMaster, and I remember the chair of the graduate secretary called me, Doreen Drew, and says, Vinay, are you on campus today? I said, no, I'm not on campus. He's like, but Dr. Jackson is here, and no one has signed up to meet him. He's literally sitting in his office all by himself. We brought him in as a visiting professor. Go and see Dr. Jackson. I'm like, I didn't really know who Dr. Jackson was at that time. I had no idea. He's this larger-than-life figure. I believe he led the prayers on Muhammad Ali, right? I had no idea who this man was. He's an African-American convert and a great scholar. He's a professor, I think, at the University of California. And I go to meet him, and we just hit it off right away. And we started talking, and I started reading his works, and I just want to give a shout out to him. Just the ideas that I'm bringing here are not necessarily my own. I've been inspired by him. And then secondly, not directly by Charles Taylor, the Catholic philosopher. And I've been informed by both of these people in this regard, in understanding and trying to, grapple with this idea that this 17th to 18th century movement was a rejection of the church. Firstly Catholic, then any institutionalized religious authority. So first they started with the Catholics, and they said, we're gonna deal with you first. And then following the Catholics, it goes to any institutionalized religious authority. As Kant once said, have the courage to use your own reason. I have that in air quotes, I'm being facetious. Today, our youngsters are exposed to what was once a fringe academic and philosophical supposition which grew out of the European Enlightenment and Reformation. As Charles Taylor explains in The Malaise of Modernity, in his Massey lectures, these philosophies began just as that, only to eventually alter the entire ecosystem of the Western Atlantic social and religious life, whose prophets are the likes of Immanuel Kant, Nietzsche, Derrida, and Michel Foucault. This resulted in a post-1950 conception of authenticity and fulfillment, which was anthropocentric and self-determining, which is not rooted in any metaphysical framework in which Allah is beauty and loves beauty. Hence, because He determines what is authentic and beautiful, if this was to be accepted, then it is done so within a self-fulfilling framework, which states to each is their own. My God and your God, as it is said. Or think of it this way, as Rousseau described morality as being following the voice of nature within us. You see, we have to understand how loaded these comments are. Our kids go to these secular schools where they spend 8 hours a day, and then they go to university and they become so-called intelligent people, and they're taught following the voice of nature within us. And they end up looking up to these people as if they're some kind of semi-pseudo prophets. I would call them pseudo, but as some kind of semi-prophetic figures. And what they don't understand is what they're really digesting is an unlimited pluralism within the limits of a prescribed political order. It's an unlimited form of pluralism within the limits of a political order, as Charles Taylor describes in The Secular Age. Now, how does this play out? As an educator, or at least, I mean, before I went on full-time into academia, as someone that was, really active within the community, how does this play out? Simply put, it plays out by over my 10 years, and this is not reflective on the school, this is just a society in general, right? It's not about the school, it's about society in general and our community in general. Every year I would see more and more individuals, both in the Sunday school and the school, so I'm not, as I said, it's not about the school in particular, accepting certain ideas that were an anathema to Shia and Muslim consciousness earlier. So for example, this whole issue of alternative lifestyle, or whatever people want to call it, quote unquote, it was a fringe element, and then year after year I would see more and more people talking about it, loving it, accepting it, whatever. And I remember I was in a Sunday school classroom, we have multiple Sunday schools in the city, so not naming a particular Sunday school. And the discussion of this so-called lifestyle came up. And unfortunately, in many of our schools, the teachers are not qualified. So the teacher that was teaching it was saying, no, we love everyone and all this hippity-da, whatever, kumbaya attitude. And the students got confused. My brother comes to me and says, bro, we have a problem. Like, we have these 16, 17-year-olds that are like totally down with it. They're just like vibing with this mentality, And the teacher was just like, yeah, just love and peace, right? That's what it's all about. As I said, this whole notion of unlimited pluralism within the limits of a political order. So he comes to me and I say, okay, fine, let's have a meeting. I'll have to meet the students. So we had a meeting with all the students, and I started explaining to them, and I was very naive at this point. This was years ago. I was a very naive person who lived in my books, didn't really understand there's ideals and then there's a reality of what people actually believe. And I came in all, heavy hitter, oh, this hadith, the eye of Lu, the Komelu, this, that. And students were quiet. And say anything. This is years ago, I learned my lesson about the difference between ideals and realities in religion. And I didn't have much to say. After I asked my friend, I said, how was it received and stuff? And they said, they really, Sheikh, it didn't go off so well. They kind of feel like there's a lot of hate out there, and we just gotta love everyone, and And it was just this whole notion, and I was just simply quoting verses of the Quran and Hadith, and I really thought that would be sufficient. I really thought that would just be enough, like, قَالَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ, قَالَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. If you love God and you love, in kuntum tuhibbun Allah fattabi'uni. If you love Allah, then follow me, and God shall love you and forgive you. I thought this is enough there. But it wasn't enough, because like 75% of the class just continued in this whole idea that no, we have to identify with this group because they're oppressed. So we have to be with them, we have to stand with them, we have to go to their marches, and we have to stand by their rights because they love us. So this was an example of how I got shocked. That there's a reality and then there's books. Then another example of this is what I call hypersexuality in the Muslim community. So when I first started out, I mean, I've been around the block, I mean, in terms of dealing with the community across the world. When I started out, let's say 10, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, this sexuality was like, let's say 10, people like 15, 16, you hear about things. Then it started getting like earlier and earlier. Every year I would be getting reports of like 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds experimenting, 11-year-olds watching pornography. And I was just like, what is going on? Like, it's just degrading. It's going down and down and down and down. And I don't know now, maybe grade 3, who knows? God forbid, na'udhu billah. And I started asking my question, like, but our religion's the best. Why aren't we doing anything about this? We have a problem. We have the best religion, and we have all these ayatollahs, and they have so many books they've written, and people who have come from Iran and Iraq, and they're all like, they've got all these ijazas and all this stuff. They're all like brimstone. They're all fired up, but yet the kids are still engaging in sexual activity at the age of 12. And it's getting worse and worse, so the people in the turbans maybe aren't doing the right job, including myself, first and foremost, at the front of that, of not doing the right job, perhaps. I started thinking more deeply, and then I met Dr. Jackson. And he says, brother, you're looking at it the wrong way. And I said, Dr. Jackson, how am I looking at it the wrong way? He says, you have to understand their point of departure. You're treating the symptom. You have to understand what is the core of their heart and their mind. I said, Dr. Jackson, tell me more. This is an honor. Like, I spent like 2-3 days with Dr. Abdul Hakim. I didn't know who he was at that time. He's such a famous, one of the most famous Muslim thinkers in the United States. And so we're out for a Philly cheesesteak with Dr. Jackson. And I'm like, tell me more. Like, how do you raise your kids in today's world? He says, I wrote a book for my daughter. She's 16 years old. I said, amazing. What's in the book? He says, we're covering the ahkam of wudu at the moment. I said, okay. But he's like, for the first 50 pages of the book, are about the pitfalls of neoliberalism. The first 50 pages. Now I'm on wudu and I'm not worried. The rest fits in because I wanted her to have a point of departure in her life, to understand the bankruptcy of this vacuous, nihilist filth, which is this, idea of unlimited pluralism. Not to say that Islam, as he's written extensively, I don't want to misrepresent his ideas, he's written extensively on Islamic secularity and all of that. Not that Islam rejects secularism, no. But here we're talking about something else. I suggest you look at his article called The Effects of Atheism on the Muslim Mosque. Please take a look, everyone, you can go and look at it. It's a very important article. So then I started realizing, maybe I got it wrong. I need to readjust the way I approach these issues. So I started reading Charles Taylor. I started reading Guy Eaton. I started reading William Chittick. I started reading Hussein Nasr, although they're all different in their own ways. I started reading, of course, Dr. Jackson's works and others. And I started coming to a deeper understanding myself. This is my own personal journey as both an educator and someone that wants to learn more. And I had to confront certain realities in front of me in order to understand that. Because often we would get frustrated, well, why do people have a mediocre or apathetic attitude towards ulama? Where does that come from? Why so apathetic? Why so mediocre? I remember once I was in Chicago, at a masjid in Chicago, and it was the month of Ramadan, and the salah was finished. And everyone comes and shakes the hand of the sheikh. The men come up and shake his hand after. And only a few came, everyone else kind of ran off. And iftar was the people already had their iftar. I understand if they're hungry. Everyone ran off. And the Sheikh turned to them and says to all the fathers, if you taught your children to respect ulama, then they would have come and shook my hand. And he told them all. But my point is that mediocre or apathetic attitude comes from a specific place. It's deeply rooted. And it has causes and reasons for it. And we need to understand that. And we need to understand what is the God that is worshipped by such individuals. What does that God look like? There's a very good book I would suggest. Again, it's called God is Not Nice. I forget that. Lehner, Lehner. It's a very interesting book. It's a provocative book. It's called God is Not Nice. And in that book, the introduction, it's written by a Christian author. He talks about this, this idea of having religion without any responsibility or consequences. And he says that the God that is worshipped of this is nothing but a vending machine Walmart God. You get what you want from him, and you get what you want from him. And he loves you unconditionally always, even if your worship is so selective and self-centered and based completely on your own maslahah and your own needs. It's not transformative. It's not provocative. It's self-serving. So often worship can be misconstrued to be worship towards this false God as opposed to the God of the Quran and the Sunnah, which I think would be the same God which we share, which Ayatollah Jawadi mentioned, with the other Abrahamic faiths. And this is very important to keep in mind. Like I said, I wasn't planning some complex academic speech. I really wanted to deliver this because the topic is on God in the modern world. And we need to contemplate over root causes. And that's where the study of intellectual tradition, the history of ideas, in my humble opinion, becomes quite important. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.